Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I am the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinar is presented on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month. Explore Iowa's programs from from pre-statehood to current day. You'll learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Now, please remember to sign up for each webinar you'd like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live because all presentations will be recorded. Now, a few housekeeping points before I introduce our speaker. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on the top of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa Culture page of YouTube in just a few days. I've disabled the chat function, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague, Rachel Hansen, is watching that feature and will prepare a list of questions for the speaker at the end of the presentation. But please note, we may not have time to get to all the questions before we end today. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, State Curator Leo Landis. Leo has his Bachelor of Science in History from the Iowa State University and a Master of Arts in Historical Administration from Eastern Illinois University. He has completed additional graduate work at Iowa State as well. His museum experience includes time at Living History Farms in Urbandale, Conner Prairie in Fishers, Indiana, and 8 years as a curator at Henry Ford Museum and Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. He also worked as curator and director of education at Salisbury House right here in Des Moines. And now I'm happy to turn it over to Leo to begin the webinar.
Well, thank you, Matt, and a real treat to be with everybody here today to talk about the history of women's and young women's basketball in Iowa. As Matt alluded to, I've done a lot of work in Iowa, and I'm a native Iowan, grew up watching my sisters play 6-on-6 basketball in the 1970s. I have 3 sisters who were all fairly athletic. But just to give an overview of what we'll talk about today, that 1895 date that I list on the screen is actually a little soft because, as you'll see, basketball started in our state a little bit before 1895, but you don't really see women's and young women's basketball starting until about that time. So we'll talk about some of the beginnings in the U.S. very briefly, and then some early days pre-1900 in Iowa. We'll take that up to 1934, and there's a rule change there that we'll talk about in 1934. Then that high school game till 1954, there's not a major rule change in 1954. That's when the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union moves the tournament from Drake University to Veterans Memorial Auditorium here in Des Moines. And then we'll wrap up a little bit talking about some stories from that 1955 to 1993 era when 6-on-6 basketball ends. And just for some background, if there's anybody on the list that has never, on the discussion, excuse me, that has never seen a 6-on-6 basketball game, I'm going to use kind of my own historical background on 6-on-6, but it was a half-court game, essentially, using a full court. And so you had 3 guards and 3 forwards on opposing teams on one side, and then 3 forwards and 3 guards on the other side. And the guards never left their side, nor did the forwards ever leave their side. So after a basket was made, or if there was a turnover in that early 6-on-6 half-court game, a ball would go to one of the forwards in the center of the court, that center circle. The forward would then throw it to one of her teammates, and the offense would go. And you did not cross the center line. You had to stay on your side of the line. There's some other rules that we'll talk about, but that's the main gist of 6-on-6 basketball in the post 1955 era to a degree. And we'll look at a note as we get along in our talk. Early 1960s is when there's some rule changes too. So that's 6-on-6. I'm going to cover that again one more time on 2 different ways, but just wanted people to have a first reminder of what a 6-on-6 game looked like. So basketball gets its start at Springfield, Massachusetts. Dr. James Naismith, is the developer of basketball. It's late in the year in 1891. You often will hear that he did it for the YMCA. He was actually working for what becomes Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts. And the YMCA has a big early history in promoting basketball, no doubt about it. But the Springfield College takes the credit for Naismith working for them and doing that work. So that's December of 1891 when the game develops and is developed. That's Dr. Naismith in his center right in the jacket, then with that first team that develops in the 1891. And what's stunning to me as I was doing this work is within a year, November of 1892, you've got basketball being played by YMCA groups in Des Moines and other clubs forming in the state. And so just one of the early ones that I came across, and this is, less than a year after the game was created. The YMCA is referencing that on the left side of the screen, you see that clipping from the Davenport Daily Times, November 9th, 1892. There will be no general observance at the YMCA tomorrow. There will be a game of basketball in the gymnasium at 3 o'clock, and social games will be the program in the parlor during the afternoon. The whole will conclude with an apple munch. Good fall time activity there. Game of basketball at 3 o'clock, and then maybe some other social games, and then munching on some apples. Just another reference that I've got on the right side of the screen, a clipping from the Cedar Rapids Gazette from May of 1893, so about a year and a half after the game is developed, talking about a team from Iowa City going up and playing in Cedar Rapids. The gymnasium instructor does give a few rules of the games. It's played much in the same manner of football. And it really was not trying to be football. That was one of the things about basketball, was that it was more gentlemanly. And so that's what the writer of the column is pointing out too, saying, played in the manner of football, but to make the game more gentlemanly, rules have been made prohibiting tripping, shouldering, catching hold of an opponent, or tackling in any manner. The ball is about 8 inches in diameter and is made after the same manner as a football. The game is played in 2 15-minute halves with a few minutes intermission. And then it went on to say the game was a lively one from the moment the ball was put into play. 10 agile athletes, so it's 5-on-5, scrambled and strained their muscles in wild endeavors to put the ball into the basket. And the audience was intensely interested. The game was but a few moments old when Iowa City, by a series of maneuvers, secured the goal. The home team made some good passes, but were unable to land the ball in the basket. The first half ended Iowa City 3, Cedar Rapids. I'm not going to read the rest of it. Just the last sentence of the first paragraph on the right goes on to say that Cedar Rapids makes a comeback, and at the end of regulation time, the score was Iowa City 3, Cedar Rapids 3. They decided to play 5 minutes to settle the contest. They tried their utmost to score, but nobody scored, and it ended in a tie. And it goes on to list the home team players. So you've got men playing basketball in our state within a year and a half of the game being created. So basketball really does take off and catch the attention of athletically minded folks, especially through the YMCA and YWCA, the YMCA being the Young Men's Christian Association, if you don't know that term, YMCA. So when does women's basketball start? And this was one of the fun parts of this research for me. And the town of Monona up in Clayton County was a real hotbed for early activity. I also saw some references to Winterset in Madison County having some early women's basketball teams. But by 1896, you can see in that upper left clipping, the young ladies have organized a basketball club, and Mr. Campbell, in the goodness of his soul, has donated them the use of the hall where they play the game. A fine $3 ball has been secured, and the girls have a basket full of fun every time a meeting is held. And then another note that comes out of the Osceola paper down below. So Clark County is just south of Des Moines. Monona, as I said, that's a northeastern Iowa town up in Clayton County, but it makes statewide news that the young women of Monona are playing basketball. So Clark County, just south of Des Moines, a couple of counties down, is carrying news that in late 1896, that the Monona young ladies have a basketball club. And then I love this early one from the Monona newspaper of March 11th, 1897 on the upper right. And again, I'm going to read a few more of this content, just if there's anybody that is having trouble reading them on their screens. And so it says, the Young Ladies Basketball Club gave an exhibition last Friday evening at which a number of intimate friends of the young ladies were present. The misses are quite efficient in the handling of the ball, and in their bloomer costumes look too bewitching and too killing for anything. A right nice entertainment at basketball where the contestants did excellent execution and effective work throughout the game. Do so some more, girls, is that last sentence. So, and then just to see that they were playing other teams by the not just doing games in Monona. By 1898, you've got that note where Monona and Luana are going to have a town. I found out that game never took place due to bad roads, but it just says, these teams are composed of young ladies and the way they can throw the ball is a caution. So just some great accounts of young women, high school women in Iowa playing basketball in towns up in Northeast Iowa. But it really is the case that you get events all over the state. So and teams forming. The column on the left from the Muscatine Daily News Tribune talks about the boys team winning what they were calling a state championship, but down that very last paragraph talking about their boys high school team, it says a surprise awaited the boys at the association room where the ladies basketball team held an informal reception serving coffee and sandwiches, ice cream and cake. So we know Muscatine at least had a girls young women's team by late 1897, and we'll eventually send out maybe some links of things to read, and one of them will be a palimpsest article. And the reason why I especially wanted to find pre-1898 or early 1898 events was William Peterson, longtime director of the State Historical Society of Iowa, great historian back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, really. He lived into the 1980s, if my memory is correct. Anyway, he did an article on the beginnings of girls basketball and references perhaps that Dubuque has the first high school game taking place in 1898. Well, he was having to look at lots of microfilm. I have the benefit of digital newspaper searches, so I really was looking hard for some 1898 and earlier events. So loved that Monona, Clayton County material here. As I said, Muscatine, we know a women's team has been formed, and that you've got a couple other examples just to go across the state, where up in Cherokee in November of 1898 from the Cherokee Weekly Times saying the high school girls are becoming quite enthusiastic in their new game basketball. If the readers would like to see the game played, they may come to the high school grounds any nice evening after 4 o'clock and watch the girls. Same reference up in Northwest Iowa with Storm Lake, the newspaper of November of 1898, saying the high school football victors were given a very pleasant reception at the college dormitory on last Saturday evening after the Cherokee game, their entertainers being the young ladies of the basketball team. So again, teams of high school women forming across the state in different communities, large and small. Muscatine's a good sized city. Cherokee was a county seat town. Same with Storm Lake in Buena Vista County. So lots of activities, but Luana is not a big town up in Clayton County, and Monona is a nice sized town, but not the county seat town up there. Just a few more references to show how socially acceptable basketball was becoming in that pre-1900 era. Came across a note in the Centerville newspaper, one of the Centerville newspapers, from 1898, saying that ex-Governor Drake was detained in Albia a day or two on account of the injury to a bridge across the Sheraton River by driftwood, which prevented the train from reaching Centerville. He went up to the grounds where the Albia young ladies play basketball and watched them play. So former Governor Drake, the namesake for Drake University, was interested in watching girls basketball, young women's basketball in the late 1890s, and then a nice photo from the Centerville yearbook, the Centerville High School yearbook from 1905 of their basketball team. And that's really when you do start seeing a lot of photographs of either university, college, in some cases, should say more colleges than universities. We only had the University of Iowa, State University of Iowa, which today is the University of Iowa at the time, and then had Iowa State College and the normal school, Iowa State Teachers College, is what it eventually becomes before it's UNI. So there's just a couple other good references to basketball pre-1900, and then a nice photo of what the women looked like, and coached by a woman in this case. So Miss Dillow is the woman in the back row with the really Gibson girl hair piled on top of her head, and she presumably is their instructor in basketball. Well, just a few more references across the state pre-1900 just to show how prevalent it was. The Alton Democrats, so up in Northwest Iowa, saying the young ladies of the high school have organized a basketball team and are expecting their paraphernalia to arrive sometime the latter part of this week. So that's 1899. Down in Mount Ayr, Ringgold County, talking about 14 high school girls have organized 2 teams and will play basketball. The organization is known as the Mount Ayr Basketball and has chosen colors red and yellow and the 4-leaf clover as its symbol. They will play about 3 evenings of each week in the room north of Askren Brothers' office. There are now only 7 on each side, but it is hoped there will be 9. Talks about who's in charge: Charles Sutherland, Miss Ginny Riggs, Miss Riggs acting as the umpire, and lists the different teams. That clipping that I had, the scan of it wasn't great. So those last 2 names are Lydia Wall and Donna Lewis, but the women who were playing were Myra Bowles, Louise Askrens, Fern Beard, Vera Ingram, Lottie Spence, Bessie Huffman, Josie Liggett, and then the other team was Captain Flora Wheeler, feeder Lou Campbell, Cleo Parker, Laura Hadley, Zella Patterson, Lydia Wall, Donna Lewis. And then a North Central Iowa Eagle Grove Times-Gazette story from 1899 and listing the number of players and the position being played. And this is one where rules were somewhat in flux and could be localized at times. And this one talks about a score of 10-8 in a game. It's the Yellows versus the Reds up in Eagle Grove that the young women are playing, that a large crowd of enthusiasts was present to witness the game, and all were more than satisfied with the play as every point was skillfully contested. The players were all in the game from start to finish, and no one allowed an opportunity to slip by which a point could be gained. Then at 8:30, the ball was tossed, and the centers jumped, and the play was on. Several goals were attempted, but you can see there are 2, 4, 6, 7 names, not 6 on 6, but 7 on 7. There are a goalkeeper, and I'll show you a photo of what I think that goalkeeper position was. It was a person presumably at the basket who would serve as a bit of a rebounder, but I am not certain of that. But I've got some photos that'll show some examples here. And just to talk a little bit about what was happening at Iowa colleges. So what today is University of Northern Iowa then was called the State Normal School. So this article from the Cedar Falls Semi-Weekly Gazette says SNS basketball, State Normal School basketball. It lists again, more than 6-on-6. So were some of these rules, again, still in flux? Sure looks like it. And, if you had women that wanted to play, you made rules that let as many people play as you saw fit. And so they were playing halves at this time, but you've got, activity taking place at what is today University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls by early 1897, teams against each other. And these were viewed mostly as good, healthy exercise, much as we were referencing in those early descriptions of YMCA, and that it could be played indoors or outdoors. And in the fall, it was played outdoors, as they are describing this event, or in the spring. And but also then a new gymnasium was being built at UNI at the time, and so that the clubs had regular practice. So this was what was viewed as both socially appropriate for young women as they were in college, and the ideas about what was appropriate behavior for young women was shifting. That had taken place through the late 1800s. This is the Edwardian period. In the US, it's kind of the progressive era, populist era politically, with McKinley as president. Theodore Roosevelt will eventually be president at about this time. And so the progressive era, where attitudes are changing and women have been politically active in the United States for generations, but ideas around temperance and especially about suffrage and voting, women are asserting their roles socially in different ways at this time, even more than they had in the past, and also working to find different outlets of recreation. And so basketball as a new form of recreation and athletics is viewed, it's moderated by women, sometimes men, has formal rules. And so it's not, a pell-mell, just, pushing people around. It has rules, though, as we'll see in a little bit here, that doesn't keep people from criticizing it sometimes. And so here's a couple of scenes from the Normalite, which was what they called the yearbook early on at what was then State Normal School, UNI. And so a nice outdoor basketball game. And I'm presuming that one of those two women who is down underneath, or that both of those women were the goalkeeper positions. If you're playing, a game that, besides having guards and forwards, as you saw in some of those early lineups, that the goalkeeper would be down at the hoop. And I love looking at some of these early 1900 images. You've got what looks mostly like a basketball today, but there is no full backboard. It's just a center post running up through behind the rim, the hoop there on the right side of the screen. So, you've got probably the chaperone, the instructor there in the white. She's the umpire or referee, presumably keeping an eye on the game, who's maybe their instructor, but also serving as a referee. And then the young women watching the shot that has taken place. And so then a nice photo of the 1904 championship team at University State Normal School that came out of the yearbook as well, and talks about the different positions as well, that you've got guards, forwards, right centers, left centers. In this case, they might be calling those what would have been goalkeepers in the earlier days, probably a guard. Nice shot of a University of Iowa team trying to represent all of our regent universities, and showing you do see activities pre-1900. The formal teams that show up in women's athletic sections of the annual yearbooks that were printed for the different, either State University of Iowa, which was what the formal name of University of Iowa is, or Iowa State College, or the State Normal School at the time. don't give women's athletics the same prevalence that they do the football and baseball team. Nevertheless, they are still listed in the yearbook. So giving, some level of legitimacy to the activities of women athletes, women engaging in athletic activity. The other common pre-1910 sports teams that you see for women would be field hockey, perhaps tennis at times as well. Just to show a little bit at Iowa State, pre-1900, two pre-1900 references that found in the Ames newspaper. Margaret Hall was the women's dormitory. And so referencing an outdoor game in May, saying that the grounds north of Margaret Hall were rolled Saturday preparatory to the erection of the basket for basketball. So it sounds like these are kind of half-court games that in some cases, rather than trying to do a full court version, that it's half-court. And then you've got a reference from 1898 in Ames saying that Miss Helen Freeman and classes are holding events at 4 p.m. and 5 o'clock Wednesday p.m. The girls are divided into divisions for instruction, and the need of more gymnasium room is already felt. The gymnasium practice is made compulsory. After the weather becomes pleasant, a basketball team will be organized and a portion of the time spent at that. So giving references to basketball in 1898, and then a nice scene perhaps north of Margaret Hall from 1906 at Iowa State College in Ames. And you can see the ball again with the red arrow on the screen pointing to it, looking much like a basketball. And I am just astounded by the length of the braid on that woman in the center. This again is kind of that late Edwardian period where piling your hair up on top of your head is customary, but presumably for basketball, that's going to be a tough way to play the game. So she went with one big long braid while she was outdoors and participating in a basketball game. So just some good references. It didn't really frame this as quite as well as I wanted, but talked about what was acceptable recreation and athletic activity for women. There had been, things like croquet in the Victorian period. Other physical activity, roller skating went through a craze. We've got some good roller skating park photos pre-1900 in some of our collections in Des Moines and Iowa City with the State Historical Society. So you had that roller skating craze at a time in the late Victorian period. And so women, again, had been finding their way to have social and athletic activity that was viewed as appropriate. And because basketball especially has that association with the Young Men's Christian Association and the Young Women's Christian Association, the YW and YMCA, you certainly have that. So just an example from an Iowa college, from our collections here in Des Moines, the Cornell College in Mount Vernon, East Central Iowa, little just off of Highway 30, a little north of Iowa City, south of Cedar Rapids, about halfway in between or so. It's a little closer to Cedar Rapids, truth be told, but nice view. Again, they've got that Gibson girl hair in some ways, but nice bows holding their hair in place, at least for the photograph, and then kind of that bloomer costume. There is one woman in some really high-heeled shoes, but everybody else is kind of in flats, what might be called tennis slippers, not tennis shoes, but tennis slippers was one of the terms for the style of shoe that was worn by women playing basketball. Well, let's move into more Iowa girls high school storytelling in that 6-on-6 rich history that a lot of us historically think of, or if you're an Iowan and of a certain age, you paid attention to, or if you're not aware of its history, it lasts through the 1990s with the last 6-on-6 tournament. But did an alphabetical list of all the winners. And so you can see at the time that Ankeny is winning, if you're looking at the left side of the screen, in the 1970s and 1980s, late 70s and into the 1980s, Ankeny is a fairly small suburb. It's a suburb of Des Moines too, but it's not like Ankeny is today, just north of Des Moines, is a booming city of its own right. It was really half farm town in some ways in the mid 70s. And so, but you see towns like Correctionville winning that very first tournament in 1920. We'll talk about them a little bit. Or Everly in 1966 was a powerhouse through generations, but especially in the 1960s, and up in Clay County, so a small town. Or Union Witten in 1968. Again, two smaller communities over Hardin County area. Van Horn in Benton County in 62, or even Ventura, who we'll talk about in 1987 up in Cerro Gordo County. So lots of small towns had these just fabulously competitive 6-on-6 basketball teams. And jokingly said to Rachel and Matt, if you were a G team in the 1950s, you stood a really good chance, whether you're Garnavillo in 53, 54, Garrison in 57, or Gladbrook in 59, or Goldfield in 55. It's a shame Guthrie Center didn't get a 1950s win in there. But just gives you a sense, Garnavillo is up in Northeast Iowa, Garrison is Benton County, Gladbrook, I'm blanking on my Iowa geography right now. Goldfield's North Central, Guthrie Center is West Central. I want to say Gladbrook is Grundy County, maybe, just trying to save myself on my Iowa geography, and I'm not cheating on that. So let's talk about state basketball tournaments a little bit and the 6-on-6 game. So you get your first state Iowa high school girls basketball tournament in 1920. Those first two are played at Drake. And then in 1922, it starts moving around. In that pre-1926 era, it's what today is the Iowa High School Athletic Association in Boone that's authorizing/endorsing these tournaments pre-1926, excuse me. For a reason that we'll talk about in just a minute, they want to put an end to girls' high school basketball. And so what becomes the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union is formed in 1926, and it's actually late 25 when they start talking about it. And so 1926 is when the predecessor to what is the girls, gets called the Girls Union sometimes, but today is the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union. So 1926, you've got Hampton, 1927, Centerville. So moving around the state, Hampton's Franklin County, kind of north central, Centerville's southern Iowa, Ida Grove is northwest, Perry's just a little northwest of Des Moines, about 40 miles, if even that, and then back to Hampton. And then from 1931 to 1954, I believe I'm correct on that, it's always at Drake. And then 1955 until 1993, the 6-on-6 tournament is always at Veterans Auditorium, and then 6-on-6 has its last tournament in 1993. So that's just a quick overview of how the state basketball tournaments are shaped and formed in the 6-on-6 era. So wanted to say I was going to talk about 6-on-6 in a different way. So pre-1935, it was actually a smaller set of courts on the hoop side of the game, and there was a center section of the court. So it was a 3-court game up until 1935's season, the 34-35. So when the Des Moines Register or the Tribune is doing a story on girls basketball tournament of 1934 in March, they do a little explainer saying, here's how the game works, that there are 2 centers and they can't leave that center section. And then you only have 2 shooting forwards and 2 defending guards on each side. So it's 6-on-6, but it's a different 6-on-6 than people come to know. So I know lots of folks like Rachel know that story, but if this is your first time trying to pay attention to how 6-on-6 basketball developed in Iowa, just know in that pre-1935, 34, 35 season that it's a different game than happens that most of us grew up seeing. So there's your Des Moines Tribune graphic from 1934 on the eve of the state tournament saying, here's how the game is played, folks. Just that first tournament that we referenced taking place at Drake in 1920. Wanted to give a shout out to or give a due notice to the women of the Correctionville High School team. There you see them as they were printed up in the Des Moines Register. If I could have found a Correctionville yearbook as I was preparing, I would have looked for their team photo in the yearbook, but that's still a pretty good likeness of the young women. It talks about the scores. I'll also show in just a second. These were round robin tournaments in that earliest set as well. It wasn't what we think of quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals. They did a round robin format. And so in this case, they defeated the Nevada, Iowa team from Story County, the Story County seat town, and Correctionville is Woodbury County, so just a little east of Sioux City. But they're playing at Drake, and they win by defeating Nevada in their final game. So here is just a couple of references to that 1920. They kind of open this one up. So you've got a whole bunch of teams. You've got Lorville, which is kind of northwest, West Central, College Springs. Sorry about the contrast. I'm looking at the results in Drake girls tournament clipping from March 13th on the right side of the screen, just to list out some of those teams. But College Springs is down in Page County, so southwest Iowa. Mingo and Afton are both kind of, well, Afton is south central. Mingo is central. I think that's Marshall or Jasper County. I get that line messed up. Then you've got Correctionville and Garner playing, Attica and Fonda, Albia, Hampton, Audubon, Heitman, Lynn Grove and Jourdan, Radcliffe and Mount Ayr, Nevada and Valley Junction being what is today West Des Moines. But they didn't change that name until the 1950s, I think. So the Valley, that's why Valley High School is in West Des Moines, because it was Valley Junction. Norwalk, Renwick, Dallas Center, Waukee, Fertile, Sheffield, Correctionville again, Attica, Albia, Audubon, College Springs, and Mingo. So just a few clippings of the teams and what the scores were. So they're not truly, what we think of box scores today, but they'd list the score and the 6 players who were on the court. And so when you look at these again, it'll say forward, forward, center, center, guard, guard. So it's that 3-court game, not 2-court game like happens in 1935. Nice shot of what the apparel was. Early was not playing in that state tournament, but a nice photo from our collection here in Des Moines. Those headbands are pretty typical. Don't know if you noticed them on the Correctionville team that I showed the clipping of, but bloomer style pants on the young women, and then loose fitting tops and some kind of sash cloth tied across your forehead, not unlike bandanas today that some players wear. Well, as I said, that 6-on-6 game of the 1930s, 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, only lasted till 1934. So here's a little bit of the explainers that go on to talk about the differences between the boys' games and girls' games. It was a 1 dribble, not a 2 dribble game at that time. The boys could dribble as much as they want. In a girls' game, there's a center toss-up, so a jump ball at the center court. but the girls can dribble or juggle the ball only once. I'm in the third column from the jump at the top of the section that says girls on this 4-column piece that is here. So that's the dribble rule. Is they're not to the 2 dribble rule yet. Also, when a young woman had the ball, or a woman playing by women's rules, you could not contest them holding the ball and shooting it. So you could not knock the ball. And I'm reading from girls can't bat ball section there. And it goes on to say the girls cannot keep one hand on the ball when it has been obtained by an opponent. They cannot they can't double team is what you get called. They cannot become the 3rd player in scrimmaging by touching the ball when the ball already is held in tie by 2 opponents. They cannot snatch or bat the ball from the hands of an opposing player. If you did that sort of thing, that was a foul. And so those are some of those 6-on-6 rules of 1934 that carried over into some ways into the 6-on-6 game that a lot of us know today. So, as I said, there started to be some upset about whether this was an appropriate game for women, even in the earliest days. And there were stories that ran nationally about basketball and being appropriate for women. But then in 1897, the Carroll newspaper in West Central Iowa carries a story saying, the female temper cannot at all times stand the strain of basketball. An expert who has refereed many games says that the maddest woman he ever saw was a public school teacher, a member of a basketball team who questioned one of his decisions. So again, a really gendered look at women's behavior. And it actually in that article was talking about how basketball was an appropriate activity for women, but then puts a very different lens on that. And what is going on in that 1925 era, as I said, is that what is today the Iowa High School Athletic Association that oversees boys sports in Iowa was also authorizing some women's activities. And so they were overseeing that women's tournament and endorsing it. And in this article that shows up in the Register, the Des Moines newspaper in November of 1925, in that lowest part of this was a front page story talking about some other issues for teachers, but saying earlier, after an attack on girls basketball as a menace to American motherhood and maidenly modesty, at the annual meeting of the Iowa High School Athletic Association, the latter passed a motion designed to banish girls basketball from Iowa schools. So this really is the impetus for the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union to be formed, is that IHSAA is the short version for Iowa High School Athletic Association, says we're not going to promote this. We think it should be ended. Don't come to us to help support and promote basketball for women. And that was a whole movement coming out of the 1920s saying, need to have appropriate behavior by all Americans, and that young women shouldn't be exerting themselves in a basketball game. Well, that's good for Iowa young women because people do get together, form the athletic union, and then leads to a very vibrant, active basketball culture to promote physical activity by young women, and leads to what, is still a very vibrant, active athletic union today in the state of Iowa. Also in 1926 is taking place as one of the big stories in Iowa basketball. A young woman from Maynard, Iowa, which is up in northeast Iowa, I believe that's Fayette County. So up by West Union is the county seat. Irene Silka is the first Iowa woman to score 100 points in a basketball game. And so I think they were playing Hawkeye, another team. It's I've enlarged it, saying that, they walloped the Hawkeye girls 127-13, and Miss Silka was credited with 110 of the 127 points. So when you talk about prolific and noted Iowa women's basketball players, Irene Silka is right up there in the early days. So a story that often gets told talking about Iowa basketball history, but again, that a small Iowa town from Northeast Iowa, still a vibrant, healthy town in Maynard, but gets covered in the Des Moines Register. So nice story there. Here's the 1926 tournament then, the first one that is essentially sponsored by the athletic union. So it says the Girls High School Athletic Union will promote a state high school basketball tournament. I think the Register gets its dates wrong and puts February instead of March because the games are all in March. They're not in February. And that there will be 16 sectional meets. The 16 winners will compete in round robin series of 4 districts. And those winners then will play in the state tournament, and it happens in Hampton. Surprisingly enough, Hampton wins the tournament in its hometown, going 3-0 in the round robin tournament. So here's that 1935 change where it is half-court basketball. You've got 3 guards, 3 forwards, and the whole idea is that it's going to speed up the game, make it more exciting, and less, congested with those centers in the middle of the court. So that's the game that then goes on to become the well-known 6-on-6 game for our state. And I just want to spend a little time because we have a lovely set of uniforms on the 1941 state champions, Numa, coal mining town out of Appanoose County, so southern Iowa. They were state champs. I think the town at the time was around 400 people, but a vibrant coal mining community. There were also stores, and we have uniforms from that era. We haven't been able to determine who number 55 was and number 45, but they are the state champs of 1941. And just as I was looking at some of the women who were on that team, they're generally of Croatian heritage. There are a couple of native Iowans, but, and in fact, I say Croatian heritage, all the women were born in the United States, but their parents were at least a good of the I think 8 or 9 that are on the team. There are 6 or 7 whose parents were immigrants, and their first language was Croatian. So coal mining community, and we've got great examples in the State Historical Museum collection. We were made aware of these in the early 2000s that they were being sold, and so we didn't get a lot of history on them, but a good example of 1940s into 1950s uniforms. Good work by my colleague Kay Coates on those photographs. And then another notable 1960s, in this case a 1960s story, are Denise Long and Jeanette Olson. Denise Long of Union Witten, over Hardin County area, and Everly up in Clay County, Northwest Iowa. Hardin County is just a little south of US 20, north of US 30, north of Marshalltown a little bit. And the 1968 game was an overtime game. The final score was 113 to 107. Denise Long, earlier in that tournament, she's on the left there, number 51, had scored 93 points in a game, setting a record. Jeanette Olson was also a prolific scorer as well. Everly had won a state title earlier in the decade, and so this was perhaps the most monumental game in Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union 6-on-6 history. Wayne Cooley, being the head of the union there, is in the center. So when you talk about storied names of the recent past, that's my lifetime as the recent past is what I'm using. Denise Long and Jeanette Olson really captured statewide attention just with that monumental game, championship game of 1968. Things start to come at risk on 6-on-6 with the passage of Title IX as part of a public law in 1972. The 6-on-6 game has its advocates, and yet women are starting to say we'd rather play a 5-on-5 game and have opportunities to play the same style of game as young men. And also as colleges start to energize their college basketball programs, Iowa women under Title IX, women start to get to play college basketball again, not sanctioned by the NCAA, but the a women's association. Iowa women start to wonder about maybe switching to 5-on-5. So it's not right in 1972, but by the late 70s, more and more young women in Iowa are wondering, why don't we play 5-on-5 ball? And that leads to then the very first 5-on-5 tournament takes place in 1985. Linn-Mar wins that one, but Fort Dodge wins the 6-on-6 tournament. So there are two tournaments happening in 1985, the 5-on-5 and the 6-on-6 tournament at Veterans Auditorium here in Des Moines. So there you see the Des Moines Register story from 1985 with the Linn-Mar women winning the 5-on-5, and as the right side of the column says, the Fort Dodge Dodgers winning the 6-on-6 title. And in that same period, as 5-on-5 is developing, there's another prolific story connected to Iowa high school basketball, and that's Lynn Lorenzen of Ventura. She set a national scoring record, actually broke the record that had been set by Denise Long. And so Lynn Lorenzen at Ventura leads them to the state title. We have her away top and shorts from that season. Really grateful for the donation of those from Ventura High School. So we had that traveling in our mobile museum a few years ago to travel the state and tell her story about her dedication to Iowa high school basketball. And so there is her team in 1987 in the annual yearbook for the team, but also playing that year was Elkhorn Kimballton. And so in the center front row, kneeling down, is a very young Jan Jensen of Elkhorn Kimballton, today's University of Iowa current coach. And so she was a prolific scorer, as you can see, maybe a little tough to see on the screen, but she actually had a higher average than Lynn Lorenzen did that year. She averaged 67 points a game. Lynn Lorenzen averaged 62.8, but Lorenzen had the higher percentage. Lorenzen played more games too, so actually scored more points, but Coach Jensen had the, or I should say, Coach Jensen had the higher average. So neat intersection there. We've got two fantastic high school, and then of course all these women are really talented, but two prolific scorers. Jan Jensen would go to lead the Missouri Valley when she plays in college at Drake in scoring as well. So showing that you could go from 6-on-6 as a forward and play, but that was a challenge if you were a guard who'd never shot as a guard a basketball, some of the challenges there. And just dropping in the Tri-Center Neola, don't try this at home photo, but I saw this in the yearbook. It's like, what a creative bunch of folks there in Western Iowa, just a little east of Council Bluffs, taking their team photo for the Tri-Center Neola 1987 photo in the yearbook. I'm just astounded by that photo with the pyramid with the coach standing on the back iron of the rim there, and the young women standing on each other, and I'm not sure what else is going on there to pull that off. So again, you start to see a push in the 80s to go to 5-on-5. The other thing that takes place is they do change the ball size to go to that smaller size ball that women play with today. And so that happens for the 87-88 season. And then 1993 is the last year of a 6-on-6 tournament for the state of Iowa. And that one is won by Hubbard Radcliffe, a longtime coach. Les Huser wins his first state tournament. He had been coaching for I think over 50 years, over 30, almost 40 years. And so he gets a state title in the very last year of the Iowa 6-on-6. So Just to wrap up and try to leave a few minutes for questions, the state of Iowa high school basketball is still fabulous. You think of, Caitlin Clark and the attention she's garnered, going from Dowling Catholic here in West Des Moines, or Audie, I'm blanking on Audie's last name, and Rachel, you can chime it in the chat. Had it in there, and I'm getting old, but plays for Iowa State now, played for Bishop Garrigan. I'm mortified that I'm forgetting her last name. But I was talking to Rachel yesterday and saying, and if you want to talk about the legacy of Iowa high school basketball, especially 6-on-6, both Tanya Warren of UNI and Coach Jensen of University of Iowa are 6-on-6 products, coaching two of our region institutions, and then Allison Pullman at Drake is also a Iowa high school basketball product. So just a rich legacy of history, and really appreciate the chance to talk to everybody, and trying to leave 5 minutes for questions, Matt and Rachel. So there we go with a wrap up on Iowa women's high school basketball, and our next program is coming up. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me.
Leo, thanks so much. It seems fitting that some of the most elite women's basketball players at the top of their game right now are coming from Iowa after such a rich history. We do have some questions that have rolled through the chat. I encourage you, if you have others, submit them through the Q&A. So first question here, do you have any favorite team mascots from Iowa high schools in the 20th century?
Oh, well, gosh, the one, and it's Audie Crooks. So just for the record, Audie Crooks of Bishop Garrigan, Algona, now at Iowa State. But when you talk about team names, I love Numa. They were a coal mining town. So the boys team was the Miners. And as so often happened in those early days, the young women's team was the Minerettes up in Everly. Again, that powerhouse. The tradition of feeding cattle. So they were the cattle feeders and the cattle feederettes. Those are maybe my two favorites, are the Numa and the Everly teams.
Those are great. So you mentioned the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union comes on the scene in 1925. Obviously a huge driver, keeping girls basketball going. But why don't we see other states having 6-on-6 girls basketball? What made 6-on-6 such an Iowa thing?
Great question. I would attribute it to the fact that, they were established programs that schools had already created. It was young women who wanted to be engaged in physical activity. So many of them did farm work. That's one of the arguments you see too. And I think we are so resilient as a state because we have such rich history in our small towns. In other projects I've talked to people about, Iowa is a state where you've got communities about every 10 miles or so. And the history of rural Iowa is connected to farming and good sized families, and that continued into the 1940s and 50s. So you had the tradition that started in the late 1890s, and when the athletic association wants to say, well, we're done with girls basketball, young women didn't want to be left out, probably talked to their parents, and their parents also, Iowa has at times had, we were slow giving women the vote, but at other times have looked at, how can we make sure everybody has equal opportunities. And so I think, it was really the young women and their families saying, we want to do this, and then leaders across the state saying, okay, we're going to form the athletic union, and that guarantees the history then of a rich basketball history in our state.
All right, we've got one last question for you here about Jan Jensen's grandmother, who off the top of my head, I believe was Dorcas Anderson, played for Audubon, who was a powerhouse in the early 1920s. We have someone in the chat who said that at a talk a few years ago with Jan, I was able to see her grandmother's uniform. So just curious if you can elaborate any more on Audubon or some of the Jensen family history there.
Well, as on that quick slide of showing, the teams that have won championships, Audubon certainly was a powerhouse back in that. And thank you for filling in history details, because again, we both know a lot, and you know a lot on women's basketball history. We didn't talk about your dad and the story connected. So I'm jumping off that, but the story I loved hearing from your dad, who was a basketball coach. He coached up in Buffalo Center when Lynn Lorenzen was playing. And the story that I loved hearing from him, and now when we talk about Lynn Lorenzen, I will try to share, is that he was scouting her as the team was going to be playing, your dad's team was going to be playing Ventura, and he happened to be sitting by a fan who was supportive of Lynn Lorenzen. It was the game she scored 100 points, and every time she made a basket, the guy would yell, "Bingo!" And so your dad had to listen to a guy yell "Bingo" 50 times. Jan Jensen, her grandmother, they were prolific scorers too. That was what was fun, I think, about the 6-on-6 game, connecting it to that. And my last little comment would be, if you've got materials connected to Iowa women's and girls high school athletics, especially basketball, would love to talk to you about how we might, whether they fit our collection and how we might help tell that story. So thank you again, Rachel. Thank you, Matt. Thanks to colleagues here like Jessica Ney for getting me photos too. So great to talk with everyone today.
Leo, thank you so much. With that, we're going to bring our webinar to a close. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. And we'd like to give one last thank you to everyone who helped Leo pull this presentation together today. We hope you'll sign up for the Iowa History 101 webinars that take place on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays throughout the year. We have many great stories to tell in the upcoming months. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, you can check out our website at history.iowa.gov. Looking to learn more Iowa history? You can find and watch over 90 recorded webinars of past 101 programs on the Iowa Culture YouTube channel. We look forward to virtually seeing you for the next Iowa History 101 webinar on December 12th. The topic will be an overview of Iowa counties. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.